and 2, I wish I'd asked to go before him. But in reality, what I'm going to present to you now is complementary to what Steve has presented. I'm hopefully going to give you enough theory about earned value management that it's interesting, but hopefully in a manner that's engaging to you without being too detailed. So in terms of the contents, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to myself. I'll try and you guys can score me, so I'm putting some learning objectives of hopefully what everyone's going to get out of the next 35, 40 minutes. There's a very interesting museum downstairs, so I thought I'd do a history of earned value. I'm trying to explain the benefits of earned value around why projects fail. So I've got a few more statistics than the 73%, and try and put that as a wraparound of how earned value could assist in a lower rate of failure. That middle bullet point is probably the most complicated in terms of the principles of earned value. Hopefully going to go through some relatively simple examples. And I'm going to show you a real-life example that I worked on. And if I'm lucky, I can revisit why projects failed, put a bit more context to it, and revisit the learning objectives. Happy to take questions along the way, and there'll be an opportunity at the end also. So I'm not going to read everything that's on that slide, and I think the slides are going to be available, no doubt, on the PMI website at a later date anyway. But I started my life off as a civil engineer designing highways and some bad bridges. I can't quite work it out. It wasn't a careers evening, but I somehow got into project controls and earned value. I've been practicing earned value for about 12 years. I've trained over 100 people in the Earned Value Foundation qualification that Steve referenced in his talk. Obviously, I'm Earned Value qualified at foundation level and practitioner level. I'm a co-author of one of the books that Steve had up on screen towards the end of his presentation. I presented at numerous conferences and events like this. I've led multidisciplinary teams in the construction sector, and I'm currently working in economic regulation in the aviation business. So when I sat down and prepared these slides, I put some objectives down, which were, I'd quite like you all to walk out the room at the end of today, having an overview of earned value, to know a bit about the history, which I find interesting, to understand the benefits. So hopefully a few more people will go out the room thinking, I'm quite interested in that topic, I'd quite like to use that on my projects now and in the future. To have an awareness of the building blocks, so perhaps in a different way to Steve presented, but just to think about the considerations you need to go through. I guess I first came across earned value when I was training as a civil engineer, and I went to a presentation at 1 George Street, and I forget the gentleman's name, but it was a presentation on the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, and it really got me interested to see all these graphs and this mechanism of bringing what is a complicated project down to something quite simple, and understanding whether a project's getting there on time or whether it's being delivered efficiently or inefficiently. Also trying to take away some of the mystery. I think by its very nature, earned value has a lot of acronyms in it. There's lots of complicated formulas you can do, but I'm personally a believer that the basics of earned value are quite simple. So the concepts can be traced back to the manufacturing in the turn of the 20th century. I don't think that's a real picture. I think that bison might have been superimposed on the cave there. It emerged as a project management technique in the US Department of Defense in the 1960s, where it went by the name of PERT cost. In then 1967, the US Department of Defense put some criteria around that, and it was known as the cost schedule control systems. Another catchy term. And I think in 1979 was the first time that a publication referenced the term earned value management, which I think was an architectural journal. I forget the name of the author. In 1987, the PMI wrote and referenced earned value management in the first publication of the PMI book. And really, it was in the late 1980s, the early 90s, that earned value started to become more prevalent as a project management technique. And I think I'm right, Steve, it was the APM's earned value guide was first published in 2002. So trying to put that in a context of why projects fail. You've got to ask yourself, what is the problem? Why do projects fail? Why do we need to do anything different? And I guess I'm no different to most people. I like to work on a project, and when that project's coming to ends, I like to go and work on another exciting project. And not many of us want to hang around at the end of a project and digest what could we have done better, what are those lessons learned. It's not uncommon in the construction industry for costs to escalate between 25% and 33% of the original budget value. And there's a trend emerging that there's far more big infrastructure projects are ending up in litigation or disputes, which is really in nobody's interests. You can read a lot of papers, you can do a lot of research on the internet. So what I've put up here is what I personally believe are the main drivers for project failure. First one is poorly defined scope. So we often initiate a project, start a project, even start constructing a project, and we haven't really tied down the scope. What are we actually delivering? Poor estimating. At the beginning of a project or a program, we often don't put the effort and time to have mature enough estimates to test those estimates. I personally believe the product of that is we have this apparent cost overruns of 25% upwards, which is actually a byproduct if we don't actually know what the estimate is in the first place. We have poor supply chain integration. So break that down into two. One, we perhaps we're not clear enough in what project management expertise we want in our supply chain. And two, we're not clear on what expectations we want of them during delivery. Poor or insufficient planning. So planning doesn't often get the credibility it demands. So there'd be other project management roles that are perhaps deemed more exciting, and perhaps your project planner or planning team are seen as slightly in a different place in your organisation chart, and we don't place enough emphasis on proper planning at the beginning of a project. And without proper planning, being able to set a proper baseline plan, we're really going to struggle to understand how we're performing during the execution of that project. We often have inadequate or poor project management processes, and usually we don't find these out until we're halfway through the project. So we're partway through the project and we suddenly realise we have our change control process is inadequate, our risk management process is inadequate, they don't talk to each other, I've got a different reporting strategy over here, and we have an unlinked set of project management practices. The last one, insufficient project management skills, and that can be in many different areas, but certainly in terms of sort of project control skills, planning skills. We tend to start projects and we don't have the right competencies, and the right competencies at all levels, so from client through to the supply chain. That first bullet point on this slide I could write in different ways, but essentially earned value is a structured approach to planning, cost collection and performance measurement. It really facilitates the integration of the project scope, time and cost objectives through the creation of a baseline plan. This is my opinion, but in my opinion, a properly structured earned value implementation is the best method of objectively understanding your cost and time status during the delivery of a project. And of course, and I think we had it as the last question, you can apply earned value to projects of varying size, scale and duration. Where I'm a big supporter is on big complicated projects, so projects that might last many years, might have a complicated supply chain, might have different trades, different technologies. If you apply your earned value properly, you can distill each part of that project down to some common understanding. In essence, you're looking at, am I delivering my scope faster or slower than I planned to? And am I delivering my scope cheaper, or is it costing me more than I planned to? And it's really, really that simple. So I'm going to try and bring it to life a little bit. So let's assume I have a very exciting project that has 3 whole tasks, and the tasks can only be delivered sequentially. So essentially, task 2 cannot start before task 1 is finished. So an example could be task 1 could be my foundations, and task 2 could be my superstructure. So I really can't start task 2 early because I need to finish my substructures and my foundations beforehand. So I'm planning this project to be delivered over a 9-month period. I'm going to estimate the effort required to deliver this project. So I'm looking at my labour, plant, material, other on costs, and I'm estimating that task 1 is going to cost me 30, task 2 is going to cost me 60 because it's far more complicated, and task 3 is going to cost me 30. I can now set that as something we would call a baseline. So it's the same terminology that Steve had as his PMB, or performance measurement baseline. Just to add a little bit of complication, I'm looking at the profile of those activities. So they're all over 3 months. Task 1, I'm going to be doing 10 effort each month. Task 2, 20 each month. And task 3, back to 10. That allows me to create a baseline profile. So what we commonly call people often refer to as an S-curve. So I've got my baseline profile with the total value being 120. Everyone with me so far? Good. So I'm going to set that as a baseline, and I like to think of my baseline as my target. So it's my target that I'm going to measure performance against. So I'm going to target to deliver this project to 120 or even better than that. And I'm going to target to deliver it in 9 months or even better than that. So start thinking of it as a target that you're going to measure performance against. So fast forward, and this is where I've got exactly the same slides as Steve almost, but fast forward, we're in month 5 and I've spent approximately 80 on this project. So what would we say the status of this project was at present? Overspent. Can we say anything about the productivity? So it looks like we may be ahead of plan. Could be, yeah. We don't really know, do we? So let's refer back to the project schedule, which was, remember, it's the basis of the baseline. So task 1, it took 4 months. Can anyone remember what it was meant to take? 3, okay. So not good. When can I start task 2? Yeah, it's sequential, so I can only start it there, and I'm at month 5. How am I going to forecast the remaining element of task 2 and task 3? So when do we think I'm the project manager, by the way. When do we think I'm going to finish task 2? Month 7. Anyone else? 8.
And what you've learned from being over in not meeting your baseline task 1.
What you don't know is I'm a very ambitious project manager. Potentially foolish, but no one's worked that out yet. And I really want to get a promotion, and I believe I can give a good story of how I'm going to get there. So I reckon I'm going to recover task 2 and now finish it 1 month earlier in terms of duration, back on plan, cruise. Task 3 can go 3 months as planned, and I'm going to finish task 9 and get that promotion and move up the chain. If we compare that back to the baseline, we can see, as we all quite rightly remembered, task 1 took longer than the baseline. task 2, I'm starting later and it says I'm going to accelerate. Wonder what the impact of that is. And task 3, we're back on program. How do you think the project is performing now? As expected?
Depends on the reasons for accelerating task 2.
Okay. Could take scope out, maybe. What you should start doing is look at the screen in 2 halves. So as I face the right-hand part of these 2 screens is history. What can you do about history? Nothing. So you could learn from it. As a project manager, I can't do anything about that part. What can you do about the left-hand bit? React. Well, there's 2 things. The left-hand bit, to my left, is the only bit I can, as a project manager, can influence. Because we all recognise the history is history. I can't do anything about it. The only part I can influence as a project manager is the future. Sorry? Yeah, it's the only part I can fix any problems. It's also, because I'm an ambitious, maybe a foolish project manager, it's got my forecasting as well, so I can maybe forecast an improved performance to get where I want to be. So, let's look at the same project data, but in a tabular manner. And I've got some magic hats on there, because I'm hopefully going to remove the magic from earn value. So task 1, 2 and 3, we all remember task 1 had a budget of 30, task 2, which was far more difficult, had a budget of 60, and task 3 had a budget of 30 again. I've put on there where we've spent the money. So we spent 40 in completing task 1, we've spent 40 on task 2, and we haven't started task 3, and luckily we haven't spent any money either. Who can tell me what the progress is against task 1? So I'll just flip back. What's the progress? So what's the percentage complete of task 1? 100%. Yep, we finished it. What would we say, based on my forecast of the future, what's the progress percent complete of task 2? We could say 50. We could do. And what's the percentage or progress complete of task 3? 0. So we're saying task 1 is 100% complete, task 2 is 50% complete, and task 3 hasn't started, so it's 0% complete.
But why is task 2 actual 40? Even more a month? That was 20 a month.
The plan was 20 a month. We'll go back. Which I haven't started now. So the plan was 20 a month, but let's say it's a cost reimbursable contract, and for whatever reason my estimate was insufficient, or circumstances arose that I've had to double my labour to achieve it. Sorry? In completing task 2, I've obviously got to spend some more money than I've spent so far. Exactly. So to get that last column on the table, which I'm calling earn value, earn value is nothing more than the budget I've assigned to that activity, which is 30, times the amount of progress I'm reporting against it. So what would we say the earn value for task 1 was?
30.
And for task 2?
30.
Yeah, so there we go. We demystified the magic. You're all earn value practitioners.
I don't get it now with your 40, because what you said is you put some extra resources.
Yep.
So actually you may well have achieved more than your 30.
So the scope hasn't changed, but it's cost me more to deliver it, but my target was still 30.
I understand that. What I'm saying is you said simply that you put addition, so you had 1 month, and your rate for task 2 was 20. So you've put in additional resource.
Yep.
And in fact, you now spent 2/3 of the resource. So either 2/3 of the way through, the earned value is 40, or actually you're saying there's an additional problem here hidden within that 40.
So the progress measurement I've put on here is a bit simplistic, so we're just taking it as 50%. You're right, there could be measures below it that would derive a different progress figure. But in terms of the learning, what we're demonstrating is there was a total budget for task 2 of 60. We're partway through and we've spent 40, but we've achieved only half of the progress. So if we look at the tabular data there, it might, hopefully it will become obvious. So I'll just ask these 4 questions and I'll come back to you if it's not the case. As a project, how much of the project scope as a total have we achieved? 50%. Why do we say 50? Yeah, so I can get the laser to work. We've achieved 60 of our project scope, remembering the total project scope was 120, so we're halfway through, or 50%. How much has it cost us to date? 80. Yeah, so we've physically spent 80. How much did we plan for it to cost us?
70.
How much for the scope we've achieved did we plan for it to cost? 60. So for the scope we've achieved, which is 50%, we plan for it to cost 60. You're right in terms of in time now, where did we plan to be? So question 4 on this, are we ahead or behind of where we plan to be?
You only achieved 75% of your total goods, SBI, CPI, so your business and time.
Good. So the bit we don't know on here is where we plan to be at this point in time, which was the point you perceptively picked up. So if we came back to a sort of the set of curves, we've got 80 is what we physically spent, 60 is what we've achieved, and if we went back to our original profile of 10, 10, 10 for task 1 and 20, 20, 20 for task 2 and 10, 10, 10 for task 3, at period 5 we plan to achieve 70. Okay. So these 3 lines on this chart is really the basis of all earned value. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the calculations. I have got a slide that shows some of the formula, but I'm not going to go into them in detail. In essence, they all emanate from these 3 points of data. So they emanate from having a plan, they emanate from capturing costs against the plan, and they emanate from how much of the original plan have we achieved at any given point in time. You can then compare those 3 different points of data to understand where you are in terms of schedule. And in schedule, it's in say, monetary terms. So am I achieving the budget faster or slower than I planned? And in terms of cost, so for the scope I've achieved, not the plan, but for the scope I've achieved, have I delivered that scope more or less cost efficiently than I originally planned? Did that help or not really?
Yeah, I understand it. It's just that what's actually happening in there is that, as somebody said, we don't know actually where we are in task 2. We've spent 40 out of 60, and we may be 2/3 of the way there. We don't know.
You're right. So it's a simplistic term here, but if we were 50% through, that's the status of where this project would be. So the three bits of data you need to start looking at is and it's similar to what Steve had. I have not achieved as much scope as I planned to at this point in time. So I've only achieved 60, whereas I planned to achieve 70. Worse than that, I've only achieved 60, but it hasn't cost me 60, it's cost me 80. So those are the 2 bits of data you would start comparing. And as I was saying, I'm an advocate for using this on big, complicated projects with different trays that might have a very long duration, different contracts. You can really distill your program or project information down to these three points. So you could look at this at program level, you could look at this at project level, you could look at this through your control accounts or work packages. And it's quite powerful to understand, I've got a variance, I'm going to trace where those variances are in my project. So I'm not really going to attempt to talk through all the acronyms on the chart, because I've not really gone through them. We perhaps don't have time. But this is a fairly standard earned value slide. So you have a baseline, which is the black line in the middle. You capture your costs over time, which is called your actual cost of work performed. You measure your progress, called your budgeted cost of work performed, or your earned value. And you predict the future. So depending if you're an optimistic project manager, how you think you're going to spend work and when you think you're going to finish all the activities. Some of the standard earned value formulae are shown there in terms of cost performance index and schedule performance index, which are really ratios of those 3 points. So you can express them in terms of a value of 1, above 1 being good, so I'm either getting there quicker or more cost efficient, or a value below 1 where I'm actually getting there slower or I'm spending more money for the amount of scope I've achieved. We also tend to look at what's my variance at the end of the project. So this was my original budget, so if we went back to my previous example of 120, maybe I'm now forecasting, and I've had to confess I'm not the project manager I thought I was. Maybe my project's going to overrun and cost more money. Maybe it was Steve's project earlier in his career. So, trying to make it a bit engaging. It's one of the games my daughter has. I've changed some of the titles, but if I was going shopping and I wanted to set up an earned value management implementation, what would I have on my shopping list? I've broken it down into 4 lists. So in my established list, I will be looking at what is the scope I'm delivering, and I would generally articulate that in a work breakdown structure. So I break down my scope into elemental chunks of work. I'd look at who's going to deliver that scope and who's going to be accountable for that scope during delivery. So I would look at what's my organisation breakdown structure. I would look at meshing those two together. So I'm assigning somebody or an organisation organisational responsibility for delivering that scope. And the combination of your WBS and your OBS is something called a responsibility assignment matrix. I'm then going to do my estimating, my planning, and my definition. So I'm going to schedule the works. I'm going to estimate how much effort's required to deliver the work. I'm then going to think about, really important, before you start, you think about how you're going to measure progress. So am I counting something, or is there a different methodology that I'm comfortable is going to be representative of progress during delivery? And I'm going to consider my risks and opportunities. So I'm going to consider what level of risk I'm willing to hold, and I'm going to also consider what level of opportunity I'm willing to be targeted against. I'm then going to do some level of confidence testing. I've got some terms up there. It doesn't have to be those terms, but in essence, you've got to test your schedule. So is your schedule really robust, and are you confident it's representative of the delivery and the activities, the sequence and the durations, whether you're benchmarking it against a similar project? And I'm also going to look at the confidence levels in my estimates and my provisions for risk. So the point in the third sheet of my shopping list is I'm standing back and I'm actually testing and putting some integrity into my baseline before I fix it. And the fourth shopping list, this is ones you would do with your client or your project sponsor, is great point now is to understand everyone really understands what the scope is. So I've done all this shopping, I've got my basket full of earned value management goods, but before I go to the checkout, I'm really going to go back and say, is this exactly what you wanted? Because this is the scope I'm about to deliver you. And the final bit on my shopping list, very important, is you document your baseline, arrange for it to be approved, and make sure that's not just a cursory signature at the bottom of the page that's someone who's very busy. Make sure there's a thorough understanding of what's in your baseline, what risks are inherent in your baseline, the durations, the interfaces, the milestones. So now, hopefully, we know a bit more about earned value. I'm going to show you a second example with a little bit more detail. So say I was building a new project and I've devised a work breakdown structure, fairly simple one. So the top level of my work breakdown structure is to my new build project. Below my new build project, I've got, sorry Steve, I've got design and surveys, hopefully the other way around. I've then got some implementation activities. I've then made allowances for project management and on cost. And then because I'm clever, I've kept a provision for risk. At the third level of my WBS, I've broken that down into more detail. So particularly under my implementation activities, I might be doing some groundworks, I might be doing some shell and core works, some fit out, and some testing and commissioning. And you'll notice I've conveniently given it a coding structure that is hierarchical. I've then estimated and got my project manager to sign off my budget for £10 million. So my estimate flows through my work breakdown structure on the left-hand side here, and it's profiled over time on the right, which gives me my baseline. So a couple of considerations. The baseline should be, I think I put strongly informed, it should be derived from your project schedule. Once it's set, it should only be changed via approved change control. And during delivery, you're going to either deliver your scope quicker or slower than planned, or it's going to cost you more or less, or a combination of the above. I tend to find if someone brings me a project and it's roughly a third or halfway through and all their metrics are spot on, I generally believe there's a data integrity issue or someone's trying to be a bit cute with their data. And recognising the baseline represents your entire project scope. There's a bit of a detailed slide, but essentially during delivery, I'm capturing some costs. So I'm assigning those costs to my activities that are in progress, and I'm measuring my progress against those activities. And how do I derive my earned value? How do I work out my earned value? So now I'm during delivery, I've measured some progress, I've got my budgets, I've captured some cost. How am I working out my earned value? Excellent. So may not be that evident, but we've got percent complete up here, times my percent complete times my budget values gives me my earned value. And we typically represent that on a graphical chart with 3 lines. And as all the pessimistic scenarios both myself and Steve have put up today, we're showing this project as being behind where it should be, and we're showing this project being cost inefficient. We don't always present data in the sort of S-curve format, and I tend to like to present it in both an S-curve but also in a tabular format. So the tabular allows you to, at a glance, see performance a bit further down your work breakdown structure. So you might have your S-curve charts at project level, and then you might have a tabular report that breaks down to, say, work package or control account level. And you tend to show in-period performance. So how have I done in that, say, month? You'll tend to show cumulative performance, and you might go on to show future planned performance. So the only thing a tabular report doesn't do is your eyes don't pick up trends. So you're just looking at that status right now, whereas the chart 4, you can start seeing whether my schedule and cost is diverging or converging. And if your performance is diverging, you've got to recognise there's some effort to arrest that divergence, let alone get back on track. So some top tips: set a baseline that's realistic and based on a program. If it's not realistic and it's not based on a program, you're going to be measuring performance that you won't recognise. Accurately measure progress or earned value at an appropriate level. Accurately collect cost at a realistic level, and I'll show you an example of that shortly. Be clear with your supply chain exactly what you require of them in terms of earned value, and do that before they're in contract. So there's no point in trying to implement earned value through your supply chain if you're in contract and there's no obligation for them to deliver. Think hard about the level you want to be able to interrogate cost and schedule data. So it's what you need for the project, not perhaps what you want. So we might want infinite levels of detail, but in reality that might not be efficient to gather and plan. And I think Steve mentioned it, make sure if you're planning an earned value implementation, you've got to have sponsorship. It can't just be your own personal hobby, because it'll be too difficult. I'm going to show you one real life example, so I can't pretend to stand up here and just show you theory. That in the middle of that picture there is Slipstream, which is a sculpture in the new Terminal 2 at Heathrow. Who's flown through the new Terminal 2 at Heathrow? Anyone? Okay. Do you know who the architect is for that sculpture? His name is Richard Wilson, but it's not the same Richard Wilson. Well, he looked different. But, okay, so that was the Terminal 2 programme at Heathrow. When I started on the programme, there was a team of less than 10 of us. And my claim to fame is I'm on the Queen's Facebook page when she opened it, just because someone tipped me off where to stand. We had an average spend of 35 million and we peaked at 82 million for a given month. It was a £2.5 billion programme that we delivered on time, and earned value was the way we reported and measured performance. What was important? Well, from the outset, schedule management was paramount. Risk management was paramount to understand what could derail us from achieving our schedule. Change control was particularly important and stringent, and that's both at a project level and through the supply chain. Performance reporting, as I said, earned value, predictability was the way we monitored performance and was the way that the project and program managers were held to account. And assurance of delivery was important. So it was a long program over many years, and we had many points where we'd test our confidence in delivering. So test that we're still confident in our outturn cost, test that we're still confident in hitting our schedules. Because once the airlines were selling tickets, there was an immovable milestone of completing that program. In fact, once the Queen was booked in to open it, there was an even more precedent to get there on time. And she didn't subscribe to coming straight away. So a big long list of stuff, which I'll go through very quickly. What did we establish to run the program? Those first three you could group into one. So we established a change board. So project level change, so am I changing the scope of my project, had to be approved by a change board with senior representatives on it and stakeholders. Baseline integrity was absolutely key, and budgets were set well in advance of construction. So you could trace all the outturn budgets for the programme back to 2009 in October, when we undertook an integrated baseline review before most of the main contractors were even in contract. We looked at performance at project level, so this is where the project manager would go to an internal review, and we looked at performance at a contract level, so looking down into supply chain, how they were performing and holding them to account. We created an integrated schedule, so this was a programme that had many projects, a new terminal, new satellite pier, new car park, all the IT and infrastructure, diverse supply chain, different main contractors, and we created a single integrated schedule where all the schedules rolled up and allowed us to take a view of performance. Leading on that previous point, milestone management was important, as was interface management. So although all the main contractors had a contractual obligation to work with each other, undoubtedly the client holds that risk for interfaces between the different projects. We use quantitative schedule and quantitative cost risk analysis techniques, and that was really to continually test our confidence in outturn performance and delivery. As I've mentioned twice already, earned value was the cornerstone of performance reporting, as was predictability of performance, and we held more or less annual integrated baseline reviews, which were really a chance to pause, test, review, interrogate where we were on budget, where we were on our risks, where we were on our schedules, where we were on our outturn performance. So quite an internal but quite a detailed review of confidence. To give you one example, this was one of my projects. So it was the satellite pier, which is called T2B, where most of the flights go out of Terminal 2. We had a work breakdown structure that had 25 control accounts. We then had 65 work packages that sat below that. We then had 264 roughly what we called control activities. And then we had an activity schedule of over 400 activity schedules that sat within that. So to give you an example, I had substructure. My substructure broke down into formwork reinforced concrete. My formwork reinforced concrete broke down into I'm manufacturing something, I'm assembling it, and that broke down into where am I assembling it? Well, I'm assembling it in my base slab, my apron slab, or am I doing columns? So that's an example of the level of work breakdown structure. We set the baseline all the way down at those 400 plus activities. So we've got baseline estimates and budgets that were set at that level. We measured performance at that level, so we could understand productivity at a low level, but we captured cost at work package level. And that was really in recognition, that's the level that the main contractor let most of their packages to their second tier supply chain, and recognising the maturity and effort to get actual costs at any lower level than that would be inefficient on all bases. In terms of, I must admit, this is how the main contractor responded. They collect progress. This is physical quantities, counting something, whether it's meters of cable or cubes of concrete. They measured progress on a daily basis. That rolled up to weekly production graphs, which essentially is the daily progress but represented in a graphical manner. These were rolled up to monthly activity schedules, so against the detailed breakdown of the budget and the detail within it, how we were performing, which led to monthly performance reports, not too dissimilar to that tabular one I showed a few slides back. In terms of how did that fit back into the client structure, there was something, and there still is, something called a monthly program report. So that summary level control account performance fed that, which flowed all the way up through the Heathrow organisation, and CPI and SPI data is reported up to their stakeholders and at board level. So there really was no hiding in terms of where you were, and it just reinforced that the programme was run on earned value data. So I try and revisit the why do projects fail. So I've conveniently changed the title to How Does Earned Value Help? So poorly defined scope being a reason for project failure. Well, if you're implementing or using earned value, it really drives you from an early stage of the project to think about scope, think about how it's broken down, hopefully play that back to your sponsor and your client. So you're giving yourself a better chance of starting with a scope, objectives and benefits that everyone recognises. Poor estimating. I'd say earned value doesn't fix poor estimating, but it's giving you the great platform to set appropriate budgets, test those, get your sponsors to review, get people to sign off. So there's enough rigour and governance that there's going to be enough effort that's going to go in to make those genuine. Poor supply chain integration. Of course, you can still get it wrong. Again, re-emphasise, if you are running an earned value implementation, you've got to make sure you've got the right expectations of the competencies you require in your supply chain, and you've got the right contractual inclusions within your contracts. Poor, insufficient planning. Well, if you've got no plan, you can't set a baseline. Inadequate project management processes. Again, earned value is not fixed, but it definitely highlights if you've got a deficiency, and it highlights if you've got a deficiency in terms of how interconnected they are. Insufficient project management skills. Can't quite fix it, but there's a lot more, I must admit I know more about the APM than the PMI, there's a lot more competence-based or competence demonstration qualifications available now that as a client organisation you can either demand or expect to see your supply chain or your providers have that level of competence. I'm hoping I'll get some nods, and not nods of sleep, but hopefully I gave you an overview of earned value management. Hopefully, well, I did tell you a bit about the history. Hopefully I ticked that one. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of perhaps the benefits, and I'll be personally very proud if a few of you went out the door and think I'm going to look into this topic a bit more, maybe use it. Hopefully you've got an awareness of the shopping list, the things you need to think about, the building blocks if you're going to implement it. And hopefully I've taken away some of the magic, if there is magic, perceived magic of that can surround earned value.